Welcome to the last bit of week 2. So till now we've looked at backprop, we've looked at individual modules such as the fully connected, the ReLU, and this, the loss function, cross entropy, is the last bit that we need to implement our own version of a deep learning library like PyTorch. And we've looked at cross entropy earlier, so we're gonna quickly go through the forward prop, and then we're going to look at the backward prop of cross entropy. And it is a little bit heavy in terms of math, but if you think about it, it's all high school math. And I'm going to do this with you, and trust me, in the end what comes out is really easy. Okay, so we know cross entropy, what it does is, it takes score vector. So here what we're doing is we're combining the softmax and the cross entropy within one function, and that is how we will also implement it, right? So what we're saying is our cross entropy takes in score, and remember this score, where it comes from? It comes from our neural network, right? So let's say the fully connected layer, it gives us, after the, let's say 2 or 3 layers, it gives us this score vector, and we call this S, and this is what is our input to cross entropy. And as output, we get a single value for the loss function. So as you know, this score, this is coming from, say, our neural network. So this is what a neural network looks like. Maybe there are additional layers before there, maybe there are activation functions such as ReLU and so on. And then finally this is the output. So this is the score that we get from our neural network, and then we plug this score into our softmax and then apply cross entropy on top of it. And what is softmax? Softmax is essentially this function, and then cross entropy is essentially just the negative log of the correct class. So in detail, what does it look like? Let's assume that our neural network gives us these outputs as the output of the last linear layer, the last fully connected layer. And then what we are doing is we are exponentiating it. We are saying, okay, e to the power 3.2, and here for the second one we are saying e to the power 5.1, and for the last one we are saying e to the power minus 1.7. And then we are normalizing it. We are saying, okay, whatever is the value of e to the power 3.2, we want to divide it by the sum of all these three, right? So the sum of e to the power i's. And when you do that, we achieve a bunch of things. One, it will always be positive. It will be 0 and 1, and it will sum to 1. And then the loss essentially is the negative log of the correct class, because for everything else your yi's are equal to 0. So here the yi's are 0, but for here the yi is 1. And remember, what is yi? Yi is our target, our ground truth, and in this case we represent it using a one hot vector, where the first one is 1 and the remaining one is 0. So, and we've done this in the past. So cross entropy, the forward prop, is really easy. The way I remember it in my head is the negative log of the correct class, and that is all that it is, right? And now what we want to do is we want to kind of implement the forward prop, and we're going to implement the forward prop by, say, so if we were to use, say, torch, and we were to just forward prop through the loss function, we would get this value, and this is the same value that you also get when you simply do the negative log of 0.13. Yes, so the forward prop cross entropy, super easy. Now what we want to do is we want to do the backprop, and we want to write this backprop out in code. So this is the assignment of week 2, and what we need to do is we want to implement this, right? So what we finally want is the gradient to send to the previous layer, to send to the previous fully connected layer. So what is the gradient looking like? The gradient is a row vector, and what is this row vector? It's dou L by dou S1, dou L by dou S2, and so on. So all the way to dou L by dou Sn if we had n outputs of the last linear layer, right? So suppose this was n cross 1. So the gradient that we're going to send back into this layer from the loss function is going to be size 1 cross n. And what we are interested in is this quantity dou L by dou S, right? The derivative of loss with respect to the scores, so that we know the negative direction of this gradient, so that we know which direction we need to go in to reduce this loss with respect to the scores in this case. Okay. So, this is what we will compute, and we just want us to remember these things, but we will again rewrite it. Of course, the probability of the ith class is the score exponentiated for that class upon the sum of all the scores, and so on, right. So, let us now write this down and let us kind of know what is this individual element of that gradient that we are interested in. So, we want to derive this, what is dou L by dou Sk, and what is so interesting is that it turns out to be this simple quantity. So, when you actually implement it in code, it is really simple, because all you have to do is do this Pk minus Yk, where Pk is the output of your softmax, right. So, Pk, as we know, is the output of my softmax, and my each element of this gradient that we are interested in. So, we will have our dou L by dou Sk as the kth element of this, and when you implement it, your code is really simple. All you need to do is you need to do Pk minus Yk. Yk is your ground truth vector, is that one hot vector, and Pk is nothing but this, right. It is e to the power Sk upon sum of all the Ej's, right, e to the power Sj's over all j. So, it is normalizing just the correct classes probability. So, this is the probability of the correct class, and then you simply subtract it and send it back, and it is so cool that we are going to derive this, but the derivation itself may be a little bit, let us say, verbose, but do not worry, I am here doing this with you, but just kind of remember that you need to kind of understand it, and the only way to understand it is by doing it. So, let us get to it, and it is even difficult for me to kind of write this whole thing down, but let us see. So, if I make mistakes, I mean, excuse me, but we are doing this together. So, I recommend that you also do this by hand, though if you implement it, it is very simple, but just do this and see if you can explain it to someone else. So, what we need is, we want our gradient derivative of loss with respect to the score k, and we know that this is a row vector. So, derivative of loss with respect to the score 1, and then derivative of loss with respect to the score 2, all the way to derivative of loss with respect to the score n. Yes. And what is loss? So, now we are interested in, let us say, the kth, the general score, and what is loss? Loss is nothing but the sum, right, the negative sum of yj into log of pj. And what we want to do is, so this is our loss, and what we want to do is we want to differentiate with respect to Sk. So, we want to simply differentiate with respect to Sk. And what happens is, let us just take it inside. So, it is negative, and yj is a constant. So, we do not differentiate, nothing happens, we can take it outside. So, it is the derivative of log pj with respect to Sk. And what is this? So, we can say this as negative log of yj, and then what happens when you differentiate a log? It becomes 1 upon, right. So, it becomes 1 upon pj, and then we have the derivative of pj with respect to Sk. So, we can better write derivative of loss with respect to Sk as this negative sum of yj upon pj, and this is then multiplied by the derivative of pj with respect to Sk. Now, let us just call this equation 1 and come back to this later. So, what we want to do is, we want to find this quantity, derivative of the output of the softmax, the probability j with respect to the score k. Okay. So, what we are now interested in is this j by score k. And remember, what is pi? pj? pj is simple, right? It's e to the power sj upon sum of all the e to the powers, right? So let's say we call the denominator d. So what is denominator? It's e to the power s1 plus e to the power s2 plus all the way to e to the power sn. Okay. And now we want to differentiate this pj with respect to sk. So which means we want to differentiate this with respect to sk. So let's write it a bit differently. Let's write this derivative with respect to sk of e to the power sj, and instead of the denominator, let's just write it denominator inverse. Okay. So now what happens when you differentiate with respect to the chain rule? So we want to differentiate a, b. So the chain rule, what happens is we first differentiate a, keep b constant, and then we differentiate b and keep a constant. So let's do that for this term. So this is, let's say, our a, and this is, let's say, our b. So first let's differentiate, let's say, a and keep b constant. So it's the derivative of e to the power sj with respect to sk, and we keep the second one constant. And in the second one, we keep the first one constant, right? So it's then, and we differentiate the second one. And so what means is we need to differentiate this bit. And when we differentiate this, remember, when we differentiate, let's say, x power minus 1, it becomes minus x power minus 2. So let's do that, minus and then d minus 2, and this term, the e power sj term, comes as is, and then we also have the derivative of d with respect to sk, right? So this is the derivative of pj with respect to sk. But now let's kind of break it up into two cases: when my I is equal to j, and my j is equal to k, and when my j is not equal to k. Okay. So let's do when my j is equal to k. So when my j is equal to k, what happens? We say that, my first term, we know that when we differentiate, say, e to the power x with respect to x, it is e to the power x, and so we can call it e to the power sk d inverse. And what happens to my second term? My d minus 2 remains, my s is equal to k, remember. So here we have sj, and then remember, what is d? So my d is this, right? This is what my d is. So when I differentiate this, what do I get? I get e to the power sk. Yes. So, but also remember that this is how we define pk and pj, right? What is pk? pk is e power k upon d, and pj is s power j upon d, right? So we can, instead of this, we can put it here, and instead of these two here, we can put 1d here and 1d here, and remember, this is nothing but pk, this is nothing but pj, and this is nothing but pk, right? So we can also write this whole thing as pk minus pj pk, right? So pj pk, and here j is equal to k, so I will make it also k, so it becomes pk 1 minus pk. Okay. So this is the case when j is equal to k for derivative of pj with respect to sk, right? So this is when j is equal to k, we get this is as the derivative of pj with respect to sk. Okay. So let's remember this as equation 2. And finally, let's maybe rub this a little bit here itself. Maybe I'll just use this much space. So because most of the steps are common, right? So what happens is, now we are saying when j is not equal to k, we are taking this case. So now when e power sj is not equal to sk, right? So the first term here in this case becomes 0, because there is no contribution here. So because my j is not equal to k, I only get the second one, which is d minus 2, and when we have d minus 2 and we get simply the derivative of say sj and e power sk, right. So this is nothing but negative of pj pk, right, because I take the d's in the denominator here, this d in the denominator here, and then this sj is pj and this sk upon d is pk, right. So when j is not equal to k, this thing simply becomes minus pj minus pk, right, when j is not equal to k. So this is my derivative of my pj, derivative of my pj with respect to sk, and this is my equation 3. And now I want us to use this in the equation that we were writing earlier, remember. So what I will use is this pk 1 minus pk when the case is j is equal to k, and when j is not equal to k, so we want to use this. Okay, so we'll go back to that. So what we want to do is we want to open this up, right. So this is currently over all j, but we want to open it up and say, okay, of say when pj, so when j is equal to pj, and when j is equal to k, and when j is not equal to k, right. So we open it up and we first put j as equal to k, so we have a negative coming from outside, and then we have yk upon pk, derivative of pk upon derivative of sk, and then also the sum when j is not equal to k of yj upon pj, and this derivative of pj upon sk. Now I want to substitute, so we have our minus yk upon pk, and we want to substitute this pk and sj from here, right. So when it is not equal to, it's minus pj pk, so this becomes minus pj pk, and we have a minus here, sum here of j not equal to k yj upon pj of the derivative, this one I will again substitute from here, remember. Sorry, so I will again substitute from here pk 1 minus pk, so pk 1 minus pk. Okay, so now let's so now let's see what happens. We want to maybe open this up a bit further. So we have yj upon pj, and oh sorry, this was the case when j was not equal to k, right. So this is not correct. When j was not equal to k, we have our this one, right. So what was this? Minus pj minus pk, yes, minus pj minus pk, and here I did it wrong, right. So it should be this pk 1 minus pk, so it's pk 1 minus pk, and in this case we have our minus, remember, minus pj minus pk, minus pj minus pk. Okay, so now let's simplify it further. The minus and minus becomes plus, so it becomes yk 1 minus pk minus sum of when j is not equal to k, and now I can again, this pj and pj gets cancelled, minus yj pk over all j, right. So the loop is over j. So now if you open it up further, so now you can say this is and we had a minus sign out there, which, so now let's open it up. So we have yk minus yk pk, and this one is when j is not equal to k minus sum of yj pk, right. So sum of yj pk when j is not equal to k. But we have our this thing, we can maybe take that inside. So we then, what do we get? We get minus yk plus yk pk. So we get our plus yk pk, and then we also have our so I have a and remember there's that negative sign outside for all of this, right? So everything I have to turn the sign. So this is negative, this is positive, and this is positive. So what do we get totally? We get our minus yk, we get our yk pk, and we also get our yj pk, right? And now let's take this pk common and let's bring this inside this, right? So what do we get? We get minus yk, and now we have our sum, and we are bringing this term inside the sum, right? We are bringing this term inside our sum, and when we bring the sum, then our j not equal to k goes, so now j is over everything, and then what do we get? We get sum over yj pk, right? So we get a sum over yj and pk. Now yj is, so we get a sum over yj pk, and we can then just say that, you know, and we have our pk here, and this is not in the loop, right? So again, sorry for all this mess, but it's minus yk, and since it's not in the loop, we bring it out, so it's pk, and then we get sum of yj. And all this effort to get till here, because now it becomes minus yk plus pk, because this sum is 1, because this is the sum of that one hot vector, right? So finally we got our pk minus yk after so much of math. Though the math is easy, but it's a lot of busy work, and what I will do is below this video I will also write the steps down, but trust me, it's hard for me because like there's just so much of busy work happening, so it'll be difficult for you to kind of do this unless you really have to teach it, right? And even when I have to teach it to you, I am still fumbling but that's also because the camera is on. But if you kind of try and do this on a sheet of paper and try to kind of explain it to someone else, I think that is when it will become really clear, because you will not implement it, right? Because what you will actually implement is just this much. But good, this is probably the most difficult high school math we will do in our 8 weeks, and I wanted us to feel complete. Even if we don't do it, we should at least know how this comes about, and this is how it comes about. So if you didn't get it and you don't like it, and if you want to be more of somebody who wants to implement things and not go, you know, into the math side of things, completely okay to skip it. But if you really want to know how the backprop happens and how for cross entropy you get, you know, our pk minus yk, you now know how.